When my daughter-in-law told me, "You should think about moving in with us for a while," I smiled instead of crying. She meant it kindly, I think, but her eyes said something else, something that sounded like pity, something that told me I didn't quite belong anymore. It was the same day we buried my husband. Everyone had gone home after the funeral. The neighbors, the old friends, even distant cousins I hadn't seen in years. The house, once full of voices, fell into a deep silence. And that's when it hit me. The real goodbye doesn't happen at the cemetery. It happens when you walk into your empty home and realize no one's waiting for you anymore. I remember standing in the doorway, holding my husband's coat in my hands. It still smelled faintly like him, that mix of coffee and aftershave. I pressed it to my face, and for a moment I wanted to believe he was still there. But grief has no mercy. It reminds you again and again, he's not coming back. That's the night I decided to say yes to my son, to pack a small bag, to leave the house David and I built together and move in with a family that already felt like it didn't have room for me. When people talk about funerals, they often mention flowers, black clothes, and quiet prayers. But what I remember most is the silence that followed after everyone left. It was evening. The house felt heavier than it had ever been. The chairs were still in place from the gathering. The teacups were half empty. Someone had left a scarf on the couch, maybe Emily, my daughter-in-law. And I just sat there, staring at the photograph of my husband that stood beside a candle. I didn't cry much that day, not because I didn't want to, but because I was afraid if I started, I wouldn't know how to stop. His name was David. We had been married for 38 years. He wasn't perfect. None of us are. But he was kind in quiet ways. He made my coffee every morning, even when his hands began to shake. He always kept the garden neat, even when I told him to rest. And he would hum old songs in the kitchen, songs that no one remembered but him. Now, the house didn't have his humming. It didn't even sound like home anymore. After the funeral, Michael, our son, stayed for a few days. He tried to keep me company, sorting papers, checking bills, and talking about practical things. That's his way of coping. He's always been like his father in that sense. Calm, responsible, but not very expressive. "Mom," he said one evening while stacking dishes, "you shouldn't be alone in this house. It's too big for you now." I nodded, even though I wasn't ready to think about leaving. I knew what he meant. The rooms did feel larger, emptier. At night, every sound, the ticking clock, the creak of the wooden floor, reminded me that I was alone. Emily called a few times during those days. Her voice was polite, soft. She said things like, "Mom, we'd love to have you stay with us for a while. It'll be easier for everyone." She meant well, I think, but I could already feel a certain distance in her tone, like she was doing what was expected, not what she truly wanted. Still, I agreed. I told myself it was temporary, just until I figured things out. Before I left, I took a slow walk around the house. Every corner had a memory. The kitchen where David taught Lily how to bake cookies, the living room where we danced one night when the power went out, and the porch where we used to sit after dinner, just watching the sky change colors. I touched the doorframe before leaving, whispering, "I'll be back soon." But a part of me already knew things wouldn't be the same again. Michael and Emily lived about an hour away, in a quiet suburban neighborhood, all trimmed lawns and clean mailboxes. Their house was beautiful, white walls, large windows, modern furniture. It didn't feel like home, but it was peaceful. When I arrived, Lily came running out to greet me. "Grandma!" she shouted, wrapping her little arms around me. She was 7, full of joy, questions, and that bright innocence that makes everything seem okay. Holding her felt like holding sunlight. For a moment, my heart felt alive again. Emily came out next. She smiled, the kind of polite smile you give at family gatherings. "Come in, Mom," she said softly. "You must be tired." I thanked her and stepped inside. The air smelled like lavender candles and fresh laundry. Everything was spotless, almost too spotless, like nothing out of place was allowed to exist. The guest room had been prepared for me. Clean sheets, a small vase of white flowers, and a framed photo of Lily on the nightstand. I appreciated the effort. Emily was thoughtful, I reminded myself. She just had her own ways. The first few days were peaceful. Michael left early for work, came home late, and always looked tired. Emily managed the house perfectly. Schedules, school runs, meals, and I spent time with Lily, reading, baking, helping her with homework. Sometimes I'd catch Emily watching me from the kitchen, quiet but distant. I wasn't sure if she felt left out or uncomfortable, so I tried to help around the house, folding laundry, setting the table, watering the plants. "Mom, you don't have to do all that," she said, gently but firmly. "You're our guest. Please relax." I smiled, but something in her tone made me sit down again. Maybe I was trying too hard. At night, when the house went quiet, I would lie in bed and listen to the faint hum of the refrigerator. It reminded me of the nights back home, when David would read in bed, his glasses slipping down his nose. I used to nudge him and say, "David, turn off the light. You'll fall asleep mid-sentence again." And he'd laugh softly, saying, "Maybe I just like hearing your voice before I sleep." I miss that, the sound of being known. Here, everything was polite, kind, but formal. Even Michael. He'd sit with me for a few minutes before bed, asking if I was comfortable, if I needed anything. But I could sense he was keeping conversations short, like he didn't know what to say anymore. Grief has a strange way of building walls between people. Everyone feels it, but no one knows how to share it. One afternoon, I found myself in the kitchen stirring soup for dinner. Emily walked in, surprised. "Oh, Mom, you didn't have to cook," she said, her eyebrows lifting slightly. "I just thought it might help," I said. "You've been so busy." She smiled a little stiffly. "Thank you, but Michael likes his soup a certain way. Don't worry, I'll handle it." I froze for a second, then nodded, stepping back. It wasn't about the soup, I knew that. It was about space, about control, and maybe about the quiet fear of losing her place in her own home. So I started keeping my distance. I stayed mostly in my room, read books, made tea for myself, and waited for Lily to come home from school. Her laughter became the only sound that filled my heart. But even that began to feel fragile. One evening, Lily whispered, "Grandma, Mommy says you might go back home soon. Are you going?" I smiled and brushed her hair. "Maybe someday, but for now, I'm right here." She hugged me tightly, and I closed my eyes. For a moment, I wished I could freeze time right there, in her small arms, surrounded by the love that still felt pure. Days turned into weeks. Michael was busier than ever. Emily grew quieter around me, never rude, just careful. And I started realizing something I hadn't wanted to face. Grief doesn't only take away the person you love. Sometimes it slowly takes away the people who are left, too. because everyone is trying to move on, and you're still standing in yesterday. I tried to tell myself I was imagining it, that things would get better once we all settled, but somewhere deep down, I felt the air shifting. Something was changing, something I couldn't name yet, but I knew the silence after goodbye wasn't over. It was only beginning. The days started to blend into one another. Morning coffee, Lily's laughter, the soft hum of the washing machine. Everything had its rhythm, yet it all felt slightly out of tune, like a song I used to love, now playing in a different key. Michael left early every morning, his tie slightly crooked, his briefcase always in his left hand, just like his father used to carry his tools when he left for work. Sometimes I'd watch him from the kitchen window as he backed the car out of the driveway, and I'd think, he looks so much like his father now. But the moment he drove away, the house would fall silent again. Emily would move around quietly, loading the dishwasher, folding laundry, checking her phone. We were polite with each other, always polite, but politeness has a way of hiding distance. I started noticing small things that probably wouldn't matter to anyone else. The way she rearranged the dishes after I loaded them. The way she sighed softly if I tried to help Lily with homework without asking first. Or how she'd close the kitchen cabinets after me, even though I was sure I hadn't left them open. It wasn't anger. It was something quieter and heavier. Something like discomfort. One morning, I made pancakes for Lily before school. She clapped her hands when she saw them. "Grandma makes them fluffier than Mommy," she said with a giggle. I smiled, but when I looked up, Emily was standing in the doorway. She didn't say anything, just gave a tight smile and turned back toward the hallway. I wanted to say something, to explain that Lily was just being innocent, that children don't mean harm with their words. But I stayed quiet, because I knew sometimes explanations only make the air heavier. A few weeks passed like that. I started keeping to my room more often, just to give her space. I'd read or sit by the window or watch the neighborhood kids ride their bikes. At night, I'd listen to the sound of footsteps outside my door, Emily's slippers brushing softly on the hardwood floor, the sound of plates being stacked, a quiet TV in the living room. Sometimes, I'd hear Michael and Emily talking after dinner. Their voices were muffled, but I could make out my name once or twice. Not in anger, just in low, tired tones, like two people trying to make sense of something they didn't want to discuss. And every time, my heart would tighten a little more. One Sunday afternoon, Emily asked if she could talk to me. We sat in the living room, her on the sofa, me in the chair across from her. "You know, we love having you here," Emily started gently. I nodded, waiting. "It's just, things have been a bit overwhelming lately. Lily's schedule, Michael's work, and, well, the house feels a bit crowded sometimes." Her words were soft, almost apologetic, but I could feel what she was trying not to say. Maybe it's time to think about what's next. I smiled faintly, trying to keep my voice steady. "I understand, Emily. I don't want to be a burden." She quickly shook her head. "Oh, no, it's not that at all. You're not a burden. It's just, I think everyone needs their own space sometimes." Space. Such a small word for such a big kind of loneliness. That night, when I lay in bed, I thought about all the years I'd shared my space
without ever calling it mine. When Michael was little, I'd give the last piece of pie, even if I wanted it. When David wanted to watch the game, I'd turn off my show. I had always made space for others, for love, for family. But now, somehow, my presence had become too much space. The next morning, I made a decision. I would try harder. Maybe I could make things easier, lighter. So I started waking up earlier, cooking breakfast before Emily came downstairs. I packed Lily's lunchbox, ironed Michael's shirts, cleaned the kitchen quietly. I thought maybe they'd appreciate it. Maybe they'd feel I was helping. But sometimes, trying too hard only makes the distance more visible. One day, Emily found me vacuuming the living room. "Mom," she said, her voice sharper than usual, "you don't have to do that. Really, you'll tire yourself out." I turned off the vacuum and smiled. "I like keeping busy." She exhaled, rubbing her forehead. "I know you do, but I have a system, and it throws me off when things are done differently." That word again, differently. I knew what she meant. Differently meant wrong. That evening, Michael came into my room with a soft knock. "Mom," he said, "I think Emily feels a little overwhelmed lately. She's not used to having anyone else around the house all the time." I nodded quietly. "I understand, Michael." He looked at me for a moment, like he wanted to say more, but didn't know how. Then he just said, "I love you, Mom. We'll figure it out." When he left, I sat there for a long time, staring at the empty doorway. He loved me. I knew that. But love doesn't always mean closeness. Sometimes it just means you care from a distance because getting too close makes things complicated. Days kept passing. I started keeping track of small things: when to speak, when to stay quiet, when to step back. I learned to sense tension in the smallest gestures: a pause too long, a smile too forced, or a door closing softly but firmly. And the more careful I became, the more invisible I felt. Lily noticed. "Grandma, why don't you come play with us anymore?" she asked one afternoon. "I do, sweetheart, just not as much as before," she said. I smiled and hugged her close. Maybe she's right. But inside, I wanted to say, "No, sweetheart, Mommy just needs her space." That night, I sat by the window, watching the streetlights flicker through the thin curtains. Across the room, the photograph of David on my nightstand seemed to watch me too. Oh, David, you'd know what to say, wouldn't you? In my mind, I could almost hear him chuckle softly. "Just stay calm, Martha. Don't let little things get to you." I smiled sadly, because it wasn't the little things anymore. It was the quiet ones, the ones that made you doubt whether you were truly wanted or just tolerated. One rainy morning, Emily was rushing around getting Lily ready for school. I tried to help by holding Lily's jacket out for her. "Thank you, Mom," she said, but there was tension in her voice. She grabbed Lily's backpack and called out, "We're late!" The door closed behind me, and I stood in the hallway, jacket still in my hands. The rain outside tapped softly against the window. For the first time in weeks, I felt tears rise. I wasn't angry, just tired. Tired of walking on eggshells in a house where love was polite, but not warm. That evening, When Michael came home, I told him quietly, maybe I should visit my sister for a few weeks. He looked surprised, then relieved. Mom, that might be good for you, a change of scene. He didn't ask if something was wrong, and I didn't tell him. Because sometimes when cracks start forming in a home, no one wants to admit they're there. They just pretend not to notice until one day everything falls apart. That night, I packed a small bag, just a few clothes, my book, and David's photograph. I didn't tell Emily yet. I wanted one more quiet morning with Lily. I sat on the bed, holding the frame in my hands. Maybe I wasn't meant to stay. Maybe love changes shapes after loss. Outside, the rain kept falling, steady, calm, endless. And deep inside, I felt something shifting too. A quiet acceptance and a sorrow that didn't need words anymore.
The morning I told Emily about visiting my sister, she looked up from her cup of coffee and smiled faintly. "Oh, that sounds nice," she said. "A little trip might do you good." Her tone was kind, but not surprised, almost like she'd been waiting for me to say it. That small realization hurt more than I expected, because in her calm, polite smile, I could see relief. I told myself not to take it personally. Maybe she just needed a break. Maybe we all did. Still, I spent the rest of the day packing, folding my clothes slowly, one by one. I moved quietly around the house, careful not to make noise, careful not to disturb. That's the thing about grief. It makes you smaller, gentler, almost invisible. You start shrinking yourself so no one feels uncomfortable around your sadness. That evening, while I was placing David's photograph in my bag, Lily came running into the room. "Grandma, are you leaving?" Her big brown eyes were full of worry. "Just for a little while, sweetheart," I said softly. "I'm going to visit Aunt Helen, but I'll be back before you know it." She frowned, her small hands clutching my arm. "Mommy said maybe you'll stay there longer. Is that true?" I paused. I didn't know what to say. Children have a way of hearing things we think they don't. Before I could answer, Emily called from the hallway, "Lily, it's time for bed." Lily hugged me quickly and ran off. The sound of her footsteps faded down the hall, leaving behind a silence that felt different this time. Later that night, I overheard something I wish I hadn't. I had stepped into the kitchen for a glass of water. The light from the living room was still on, and I could hear Michael and Emily talking. Their voices were low, but clear enough to catch pieces. "I just think it's better this way," Emily was saying. "She seems sad all the time, and it affects Lily. It's not good for her to see so much grief." Michael sighed. "She's my mother, Em. She just lost Dad. It's only been a few months." "I know," Emily said, her voice softening. "I'm not blaming her. I feel like we can't move forward while she's here. Everything reminds her of him, and it makes the house so heavy." There was a long pause. Then Michael said quietly, "Maybe some distance will help." Those words, they stayed in my chest like stones. Some distance will help. It wasn't anger I felt. It was more like a slow breaking, quiet and deep. I realized then that while I had been trying to heal inside their home, for them, my presence had become a reminder of what they were trying to forget. The next morning, I woke up before dawn. The house was still. I sat on the edge of the bed, holding David's photo in my hands. He was smiling in that picture, a calm, gentle smile that always made me feel safe.
"Looks like I'm leaving again, David," I whispered. Only this time it wasn't just the house I was leaving, it was everything that used to feel like family. That day, Emily asked if I needed help with my luggage. "No, thank you," I said softly. "It's just a small bag." Lily ran to me, tears already in her eyes. "Don't go, Grandma," she said. I knelt down and hugged her tightly, breathing in the smell of her shampoo, strawberry, and soap. "Be good for Mommy and Daddy, okay? I'll call you every day." She nodded, trying to be brave. Children always try to be braver than their hearts allow. When I stood up, Emily touched my arm gently. "Mom, we'll miss you." But her eyes didn't meet mine. I smiled, the kind of smile that hides everything. "I'll miss you too." Michael carried my bag to the car. As we drove to the station, neither of us said much. The air between us felt thick, full of everything we weren't saying. When we arrived, he parked the car and finally spoke. "Mom, I hope you know how much we love you." I nodded. "I know, Michael." He looked out the window, his voice softer now. "It's just been hard for all of us." I wanted to tell him that I understood, that grief changes people in ways they can't explain. But before I could, he leaned over and hugged me. It was quick, careful, almost formal. "I'll call you when you get there," he said. I smiled again. "You take care of them, okay?" And then he drove off. I stood there for a long time, watching the car disappear down the road. For a moment, I felt like a stranger in my own life. At my sister Helen's house, things were quieter. She lived alone, surrounded by framed photographs of her grandchildren. Her house smelled like cinnamon and old books, familiar and comforting. "You look tired," she said when she opened the door. I smiled faintly. "I suppose I am." She didn't ask questions. She didn't need to. Sometimes the people who've known you longest don't need explanations. They just let you sit beside them until the silence feels safe again. Over the next few days, I started to breathe differently. There was no tension here, no cautious words or quiet sighs, just peace. But peace has its own kind of loneliness, too. Every night I would lie in the guest room, staring at the ceiling, thinking of Lily. I wondered what she was doing, if she missed me, if she still looked for me at breakfast. And sometimes I would whisper to the dark, maybe it's better this way. Maybe distance really does help. But my heart never believed it. A week later, I called Michael to check in. He answered on the second ring. "Hey, Mom, how are you?" he said, his voice cheerful but distant. "I'm okay. How's everyone?" "Good. Lily's busy with school. Emily's fine. We've just been catching up on things." I waited for him to ask when I was coming back. He didn't. Instead, he said, "I'm glad you're resting. Take your time, okay?" Take your time. Those words felt final, like the door had quietly closed and no one wanted to make a sound about it. That night, Helen made tea for us. We sat at her kitchen table, the soft ticking of her clock filling the silence. "You know," she said gently, "sometimes being needed is what keeps us alive. And when that stops, it's hard to know where to put all that love." I looked down at my cup, the steam rising slowly. "That's exactly how it feels," I whispered. She reached across the table and held my hand. "Martha, you've spent your whole life giving. Maybe now it's time to learn how to simply be." Her words stayed with me long after she went to bed. I sat there, staring at the empty chair across the table, the same way I used to stare at the one that David used to sit in. Maybe that's what grief really is, learning to live with the empty chairs without trying to fill them. A few days later, I received a small envelope in the mail. It was from Lily. Inside was a drawing, a stick figure family holding hands. There was Mommy, Daddy, Lily, and a small figure standing off to the side. She'd drawn a little arrow and written, Grandma's house. My eyes filled with tears. Even she understood I wasn't part of their daily life anymore. I was somewhere else now, loved maybe, but no longer there. I pinned the drawing to the wall beside my bed. It hurt to look at, but it also reminded me that love can still exist, even from afar. And maybe that's how families survive after loss. Not by staying together in one place, but by learning to love each other from a distance. That was the moment I knew I wouldn't be going back. Not because they didn't love me, but because sometimes love changes shape after death, and the pieces that remain don't always fit the same way again.
The first few weeks at Helen's house were quiet. The kind of quiet that doesn't ache, but doesn't heal either. Just stillness, like the world had pressed pause and was waiting for me to decide what came next. I started taking morning walks again. The small town felt different from the city, slower, gentler, kinder in little ways. Neighbors smiled when they passed by. Birds gathered near the old oak trees. It wasn't home, but it was safe. And after everything, maybe safety was enough. Some mornings, I'd sit on the porch with my tea, watching the sun rise over the hills. That golden light always reminded me of David, the way he'd open the curtains just to let the morning in. He used to say, "Light doesn't fix things, Martha. It just reminds you they're still there to be fixed." I didn't fully understand that then, but now, sitting alone with my thoughts, I think I finally did. Grief doesn't disappear. It just learns how to live beside you quietly. And if you let it, it teaches you gentleness with yourself and with others. A month passed before Michael called again. He sounded cheerful, like someone calling a distant friend. We talked about small things, the weather, Lily's school play, how Emily was busy with work. Then, before hanging up, he said, "Mom, Lily wants to talk to you." Her little voice came on, full of warmth. "Grandma, I sang a song in my play. Mommy said I was brave." I smiled through tears. "I bet you were the bravest one up there." She giggled, then whispered, "I miss you." I pressed the phone close to my ear, wishing I could hug her through the line. "I miss you too, sweetheart, every single day." She went quiet for a moment and said, "Mommy said we'll visit you soon. Is that true?" I hesitated, not because I doubted it, but because I'd stopped waiting for things that might not happen. "I'd like that," I said softly, and that was enough. After that call, I started keeping a small notebook by my bed. Every night, I'd write one line about my day. Not what I lost, but what still remained. Some days I wrote, "The jasmine bloomed today." Other days, "Helen made soup. It tasted like home." And sometimes, simply, I thought of them. It wasn't much, but it kept me grounded, reminded me that life continues, even quietly. One afternoon, I received a photo message from Emily. It was a picture of Lily at her piano recital, sitting upright, her little hands on the keys, her smile bright. Under the photo, Emily had written, "She played your song." I stared at that message for a long time, not because of the song,
though it was the same lullaby I used to hum to Lily when she couldn't sleep. But because of the message itself, it wasn't long, it wasn't emotional, but it was something. A bridge, small and fragile, reaching out again. I typed back, "She looks beautiful. Tell her grandma's proud." Emily replied with a heart emoji. And that simple gesture felt like forgiveness, quiet and wordless. Time moved differently after that. Days blended into weeks, weeks into seasons. I started volunteering at the local library, helping children with their reading. Their laughter filled the empty corners of my days. Sometimes, when one of them looked up at me with wide eyes and called me Grandma, my heart would ache, but in a soft way. Because love doesn't always stay in the same house. Sometimes it travels, finds you again in unexpected places. It was on a Sunday afternoon, almost a year after I had left Michael's home, that a small envelope arrived. Inside was a drawing again. This time, the same stick figure family, but different. We were all standing together now, holding hands, and under it, in Lily's handwriting, "We love you, Grandma." That one sentence undid me, not in sadness, but in gratitude, because love, even after distance and silence, had found its way back. That night, I sat on the porch again, watching the sunset turn the sky to gold. The wind carried the faint sound of children playing somewhere down the street. Helen was inside, humming softly to herself. I closed my eyes and whispered to the air, maybe to David, maybe to no one. "You were right, you know. Light doesn't fix things, but it does remind you they're still there to be fixed." A small laugh escaped me, tired but warm. I didn't feel angry anymore. Not at Emily, not at Michael, not even at the silence that had grown between us. Because I understood now. Sometimes family isn't about who stays under the same roof. It's about who still holds you in their heart, quietly, even from far away. When I went back inside, I paused by the hallway mirror. For the first time in a long while, I didn't just see a widow or a mother who had been left behind. I saw someone still standing, gentler, wiser, still capable of love. And maybe that was enough. Maybe it always had been. A few weeks later, Michael and Lily finally came to visit. They arrived on a bright afternoon, their car pulling into Helen's driveway. Lily ran toward me the moment she saw me, her arms open wide. "Grandma?" I hugged her so tight I could feel her little heartbeat against mine. Michael stood behind her, smiling softly. He said, "I told you we'd come." I nodded, my eyes full of tears. "I never stopped believing you would." We spent the evening talking, not about the past, not about what went wrong, but about small things, safe things. And somehow that felt right. Because healing doesn't always arrive in big apologies or perfect words. Sometimes it shows up in laughter around a dinner table, in shared silence that doesn't hurt anymore, in knowing you can sit together again, not as who you were, but as who you've become. That night, after they left, I sat in the quiet again. But this time, it didn't feel lonely. It felt full, like the silence had finally learned how to hold me gently. And as I looked at the photo of David on the nightstand, I whispered, "We're okay now. Not the same, but okay."